Hello, Internet. It's me, Ashley, and here we are with Archetype, sponsored by Lenovo and AMD. So, welcome. Hope you guys are enjoying your Tuesday. It's raining here again. I forgot to check the weather, but all good. So, let's get into it. We're sculpting a ball. Just kidding. Last week, we went ahead and started our new archetype, or our new character, which is the monster. So I gathered some more reference. Some of this is from the previous stream, but the previous stream, if you didn't join us, we did some fun sketches of coming up with a creature that our Darvish character could kind of fight or interact with in a world belonging to the same thing, of some sort of, desert scene or something like that. So yeah, I just gathered some more reference of anatomy and kind of getting some more animal reference. Along with, also, I really love looking at traditional sculpture, especially traditional animal sculpture. I think the way they push shapes and the way they push form. Steve Lord is another really good example. This isn't one of his works, but Steve Lord's another good example of really cool pushed anatomy. So we'll see where we can go. And then also I have reference of some of my favorite, artists that draw. So this is Claire Wendling. I think I mentioned her last one. But, you don't always have to just look at 3D stuff or sculptural stuff. You can also just reference drawings and see what kind of shape language they have. And see how they simplify forms and things. So yeah, I like a broad range of realistic to sculptures to drawing to give yourself a nice range of stuff to look at, but not too much. So with that, we're gonna get into walking out this archetype. And like always for these streams, I like to just start with a ball. If you want to, you could do, some Z spheres or something like that. There we go. It's like, why isn't that working? But I kind of always like to start fresh. And I highly recommend doing that too if you're, beginning sculptor or beginning artist. I think it's good to practice, your basic shapes and fundamentals when it comes to working in 3D. In the industry, we work enough with, base meshes or something that's already pre-existing or something like that, but it's always nice to always keep practicing. There we go. So I'm just going to start with basic skull shapes. Try to get an idea of where the eye is going to be. The eye will go. And of course, if you're there, always say hi. I always like to see who's in chat watching. Yeah, so today's a monster. I guess this month's monster is a lot about creature design and anatomy. So when it comes to sculpting, animal anatomy or animal design, all those fundamentals definitely come into play, regardless of whether it's human or creature. I think a lot of people tend to kind of forget about the creature side of things, or sometimes the animal side. Whereas back when I was younger, I didn't really like sculpting humans. I liked sculpting animals. I was a big fan of, Steve Irwin and Animal Planet. And so all the stuff that I used to watch was like top 10 most extreme. If you guys have like a favorite animal show that you guys used to watch, definitely drop it in the comments. But yeah, so, I was never really watching a bunch of cartoons and stuff when I was a kid. I loved watching, Nat Geo Wild and Animal Planet. So I was super into animals and the idea of like creature design. I used to draw dragons all the time. And yeah, it was super, super funny. So some people, when they're like, "Oh, what was your favorite, cartoon show?" I can't even think of any half the time. Flipgate Central, I think is the name, on YouTube says, "Hi, Annie enjoys watching the arts panel. Good stuff." And I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Yeah, if you guys want to check out another really cool thing that I did recently, Gnomon had a live event of a panel of character artists. That was me and 3 other character artists. You can check it out on YouTube. It was a live stream, but now I think it's just there permanently. And yeah, we talk about our artist journey of being character creature designers, and it's super, super cool. Definitely check it out. I had a lot of fun. A lot of good questions went around, and it was a really organic conversation about being in the industry and being an artist in this industry. Thank you, host. You can watch that while watching my stream. You can hear me talk twice. It's super exciting. I'm just going to start pushing and pulling out these forms here. Also, Sir Saito says I sculpt really fast. Thank you. I think the biggest thing, actually, I want to hit on that, is sculpting fast is not really about me literally being faster. It's about, your efficiency in a thing. I'm actually going to, well, I can just cut it. I'm going to auto group this. I want to cut it into like where the shoulder is and where the rib cage is. So I can just grab this section and I can create that a new poly group. And then when I do that, it'll, there we go. I'm going to go back down to 16. I want it to be really low res. There we go. We're just getting the basic shape. So something like the, I guess you could call it kind of like the shoulder girdle, right? Which is the shape of where the scapula will be. And then we're going to block in, I like to block in the rib cage itself. And then we can add stuff to it later. But I like to really make sure that I get that volume in there and looking at it from all sides to make sure that it's feeling good shape-wise. And this is the part that's fun for me. I personally love sculpting animal anatomy. So I'm super excited for this this month's character. Should be a lot of fun. Storm Crow on YouTube says, just started watching you sculpt and it's super inspiring. I really appreciate that. I hope that you guys are always kind of looking for, professional resources out there to learn from and to watch. I always feel like, I don't know, sometimes watching paint is literally like watching paint dry. Or watching somebody sculpt might seem a little boring or monotonous. But I do think you get a lot of takeaways from it that are really important. So I hope I keep it somewhat exciting for you. I'm placing in the hips now. And then I'll grab this torso piece again and then extend it out. So I can get kind of the obliques and what would basically be like the stomach fat, essentially. So I like to keep those separate because I like to try to remember where the rib cage sits, so I kind of have like a piece for that separately, and then I can block out the rest of the body. I also think doing it this way helps me keep length. It also helps you not make your torso too short, especially with something that's like a big cat that's really long. And we can always exaggerate how long our character is, and we are going to, since our reference in our drawing that we did last week is very much like that. Philip Cook from YouTube says, I love your work. You guys are so nice. You guys aren't even asking questions. You guys are just complimenting me. I'm going to get a big fat ego head. It's going to be great. Be like, yeah, these are all my fans. We have like a little group posse going on. It's going to be fun. But yeah, the important part of, this type of stage is just getting in the rough shapes of stuff. So while these shapes are simple, they're very intentional. And I think drawing helps this part of the process a lot. Main reason is because when you're gesture drawing, or if you go to the zoo and you draw animals, you'll very quickly get shorthands for shapes, basically, which can also they transfer directly over to your shorthand sculpt for sculpting. Osasato, sorry if I never pronounced your name correctly, but hello again. I recognize your name. Nice to see you. But yeah, I mean, all this stuff, all the shapes that I'm doing here is the same way I would block out a drawing. It's just that you're doing it in all axis instead of just two, which is always, it's going to be more of a challenge. And, with that comes kind of a greater understanding of those forms. But you can see I reuse a bunch of shapes and I just kind of meld them into what I know is going to be the arm and elbow. I'll try to make this feel more like the goal is to make this feel more like the intercepting tricep here. And I'll get into, we can talk some animal anatomy when we get there. But for now, I just want to block in all these shapes. I also have I don't know if you guys can see. You guys can't see it, but I do have a book in front of me. And in that book is reference for lion anatomy or big cat anatomy. This is a book by Elliot Goldfinger. So he has two. He has Animal Anatomy for Artists, and then he has Human Anatomy for Artists, and they're both really great books. And you can see I also have my 3D sculpt that I have of a lion. I need to get more of these of different animals. But big cats are always, if you're gonna get one, I do feel like big cats is a really good one to get, because big cats can be really complicated just because they're really dynamic shape-wise. A lot of artists say that if you can draw big cats and if you can draw horses, usually you can draw pretty much any other animal fairly easily. Not entirely, but I do think a lot of that can be fairly true. Whoops, I just duplicated the whole thing. And reason being is well, for one, there's kind of two major or maybe three major categories usually for animals. There's going to be your ungulates or herbivore type creatures. Ungulate just means hooved. So if you get used to drawing a horse, which is probably the more complicated ungulate than some others, such as like a deer or something like that, drawing a horse or drawing a deer, fairly similar. If you draw a big cat, you can also kind of draw canines, so dogs and cats tend to have very similar anatomy, and then something like maybe a bear would be good to get to know, because there's a couple different kinds. So there's tardigrade and plantigrade and digigrade. Tardigrade means that they walk on their ankles, so or plantigrade, sorry. Plantigrade is like us, where we actually can plant our whole ankle onto the ground. This right here is actually a lion's ankle, so this whole thing is their foot. So if I remember correctly, this is tardigrade, and then digigrade is like ungulates, which walk on their digits or their fingers. So yeah. So if you can, those are like the biggest differences in comparative anatomy. There's obviously flying animals and, lizards and things. But overall, if you can draw a horse, a canine, and like a bear, you can kind of get through the animal. You can get a lot done in the animal kingdom just by knowing those anatomy structures. Hello, Synth. Happy Tuesday. Where the blocking's going. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to actually stretch this down and then oop. Now it's 2. So yeah, if you guys have any animal questions or anatomy questions, I would love to try to be able to answer them during this sculpt and this stream. We'll be continuing, animal anatomy and all that stuff throughout, but I like to block out all this stuff based on basic structures first of where joints are, essentially, and then kind of go from there. Which is the same way I block out all my characters. A lot of it has to do with one, comparative anatomy, but also knowing that I kind of treat my sculpts, especially in this stream, kind of like as if they're little toys or dolls. And that helps me a lot. Be able to pose and stuff later and to kind of block out things and not go too far too quickly and keep everything really low and simple. Yeah, meerkats are really interesting. I don't exactly remember what not kingdom, but what animalia, is that what it is? The Latin term of what, you know, where they're ranked. I don't think they're a rodent. I'm actually not entirely sure. Meerkats are a weird one, but they have actually pretty similar anatomy to like a really tiny, skinny bear. And like because of the way they walk and stuff. I think they're more tardigrade, but yeah, once you know the structures of, you know, certain anatomy and anatomical creatures or animals, all the other ones kind of fall into line pretty quickly. Just trying to get this foot shape. I find that sculpting feet from the bottom actually is the most helpful usually, because then you can get the full padding, like the actual footprint of it first. And that kind of helps just be able to block out the rest of the volume a little bit. And then you could connect it. And again, these are still all separate, but when even at a low poly level like this, when you play brush over them, they blend together pretty easily. So I could easily start kind of blending this stuff together if I wanted to, but I'm not going to get there quite yet. I'm still blocking out a decent amount of this guy. Also, you can see that I haven't really started stylizing anything yet. I want to get the basic proportions in there first before I start pushing anything too crazy, because right now this just kind of feels like I'm doing a study of a lion or some sort of big cat, which is totally fine. And I kind of like to do that first before jumping into pushing a bunch of shapes around. Mona's the best meerkat around for sure. Although I don't really know many other popular meerkats in movies. If you guys know one, definitely let me know. But no worries indeed, Synth. No worries. I'm gonna push this in and push the rib cage out a bit more. I'm also going to shrink the rib cage back to where I think it should kind of be here, and allow this middle section to be kind of where the obliques and spine would be. The obliques that are on our side, on top of the hips, are actually up here on animals. So go. Now I can start kind of pushing some of these shapes out and starting to find those silhouettes of animal anatomy that we all know and love so much. And, you know, a lot of it's also going to be checking my silhouette here to make sure that all this feels correct. You know, if I look at this right now, I would say probably the head feels a little too small. I like the size of I like the length so far of the body, but right now the head is starting to feel a little too small. But a lot of that too could also, again, this is why it's important to block out everything first, because the moment you add something like maybe ears, the head will kind of adjust a little bit and maybe look a little bit bigger. So yeah, we can check that out. We can add ears first and see what that looks like. I'm gonna go ahead and flatten that. Rheapanphilovia? I don't know if I know. I'm sure I might know that anatomy model that you speak of. There's a lot of really good anatomy models out there. The one that's sitting on my desk, I think, is made by someone named Gabriella somebody. And this one isn't as realistic as maybe like in my reference I have June's Anatomy, which is fantastic reference for this stuff. Very realistic, and he has a bunch of different kinds. He has a really nice variety of animals. That's really, really cool. But this one's a bit more stylized looking. So take your pick as to which one you like, but the big mistake people make too is making the ears really flat, but ears have actually tons of muscle and volume to them, especially in the back. They might seem a little flat in the front, but they're definitely nice and fat in the back. Cool. So far so good. Start carving that out a little bit to find the right width for these guys. I think the head still feels too small, so I'm going to go ahead and grab it, mask it, position it, and make it a little bigger. Not by a lot. It's really subtle. You can always go back and forth, so you can kind of look at where it was and where, you know, it's a really small change. But every little change helps. And this will always keep changing as we flesh out, you know, our character a bit more. Which now that's in an okay place. I'll add the tail a little bit later, but once I get like a bigger block out in. But now we can start kind of maybe putting our character more in our proper position. So I'm gonna lower the head down. Stormcrow on YouTube is asking, would I recommend a book or artist for creature design? There's a lot, but I would say a really good one is Tara Whitlatch, and then Claire Wendling is a really good one as well. And we can drop those names, I'm sure, in the chat. So if you have all your proportions there, you can kind of start pushing and pulling things, and it won't get too messy. But I'm gonna start adding some anatomy that's more accurate to our creature design. Maybe make them a little longer. Thickness is really important too. Checking out that thickness of the head and neck. Yeah, Tara Whitlatch is a really good one. Claire Wendling's really good once you understand animal anatomy, how to push that anatomy. Her shape design is really, really solid. She's a French illustrator. slash animator. And she's definitely I think she's definitely one of my favorite artists for sure. But Tara Whitlatch has 3 books. There's Animal Anatomy, there's a creature design book, and there's also there's an Art of Star Wars book that she has, and there's Animals Real and Imagined, I think. But all of them have the biggest value in those books is in the back she has her animal sketches, like her studies, and they're insane. They're amazing. They're some of my favorite sketches to look at. We're gonna shorten up his legs a little bit. I like to look to check ground planes. You can kind of just put your character on the bottom here to check it. You make the head a little bigger. Maybe a little stouter. Trying to find that happy medium. I'm looking at my drawing and seeing, what is it that I like about my drawing that I can make sure I keep, in my final sculpt. And this is the part that, today is going to be probably just blocking out some stuff. Probably nothing any crazier than that. So, yeah, it's just the one part that you want to make sure that you get right, or else you'll end up kind of polishing a turd, which you don't want. You don't want to polish turds. You want to make cool animals and creatures. And so you remember watching Tara Whitlatch's Gnomon video, and yeah, that's actually how I found Gnomon. Was that I just found her DVD, and I just really wanted the DVD. And so I was like, Dad, can I have this DVD? And he's like, what's Gnomon? I was like, I don't know. I just want this Tara Whitlatch DVD. And then I found out it was a school, and 2 years later, 3 years later, I think it was like 2 years later, I submitted my portfolio to go to Gnomon, and here I am later, having graduated and being in this industry for almost 8 years now, I think. Something like that. So yeah, Tara Whitlatch is actually the reason why I even found creature design and discovered that it was a job. It was because I loved her animal drawings when I was learning how to draw. And then I discovered that she kind of took animal anatomy and then combined it with creatures, and did a bunch of stuff for the Star Wars and all that. And I was like, oh, this is a job. Like I could make a living doing this? No way, So I actually owe my career to her. I've gone to multiple talks of hers, and I absolutely adore her. She's amazing. I'm gonna add that tail now. I will probably later just turn it into a nicer cylinder, but I'm just gonna stretch this out for now, so I can start getting the full. Here we go. I think this is coming along. I think I made it, maybe he's a little too thin. I think we can kind of start thickening up some of this. I always like looking at the creature from the top down, so I can see where the widest part of the rib cage and all that stuff is going to be. And yeah, I just think he's a little and start kind of widening some stuff out here. And it'll look a little funky at first because ZBrush's, you know, symmetry is gonna haunt you and hinder you a little bit, but we'll get there. Just making sure that the widest point of the ribs is going to be, you know, across here. So you can kind of sculpt that stuff back and make sure that the width is coming from the right place. That's the biggest thing about, you know, sculpting in just in general is we know where these silhouettes sit, but it's about where they sit on that model now that makes it harder when it comes from transferring from like 3D or 2D to 3D. So an example of this, you know, is we know that there's a calf here, you know, so from the front, if you look at just the back leg, for example, if you look at the silhouette of the calf or of the leg from the front, what we do know is, that's interesting. Local symmetry is turning on for that. That's weird. Anyway, we do know that there's going to be the ankle part here. This part on the inside is going to be thin. There's going to be an apex here, right? But where this calf is, you know, there's a calf here, and then there's going to be a rounded part here. But, you know, from this view, I can technically put that volume up here, right? And I could thin out this, and I could get the same silhouette effect from the front. So the important thing about knowing, you know, the silhouette of something is not just where this apex is from this 2D view, but knowing where it sits in 3D. So I know that the shin bone is the thin part here, but the calf comes up and around, right, back here, which is what from the front gives that thick volume, right? So when it comes to going from 2D drawings to 3D, it's a matter of, you know where that calf is, but where does it sit in space on something? That's the more important part. Hope that makes sense. A little weird of a concept, but it's all about silhouette, but also putting what makes the silhouette in the right spot, which, yeah, can be kind of weird. I keep forgetting that I don't have symmetry on. There we go. You know, and again, it's helpful if, you know, if you're lost on a certain section, you know, if I'm looking at my model, I can turn it like this and go, oh, what's the widest part, you know, of the hips? Oh, it's, you know, the iliac crest, right, which is this part right here. So the widest part of the hips is going to be up here, and then it's always going to taper. And usually from the top view of animals, you very rarely see the thighs stick out a whole lot. Especially in like big cats or things that are, you know, designed to kind of run forward, you're not going to be seeing a whole lot of silhouette of the legs from the front. Or from the top view, I mean, not from the front. Also making sure that you splay. A lot of people get back legs wrong. For one thing, this is a big pet peeve of mine. So a lot of people will draw back legs like this. This drives me nuts. There's not a lot of things like this that look correct. There's just way too much pressure that's happening on, you know, the force is forcing down this way, but then this is forcing up that way, and it's just actually not holding itself up. So when you really watch and be careful of these curves that you're creating in silhouettes of animal anatomy, just be very careful and aware of that. And then also from the back legs, instead of just making them completely straight, you want to make sure that this comes in at an angle, you know, back, and then the knees are kind of splayed out. It's almost as if you were to like bow leg your own legs. That's kind of how animals can more naturally sit, and you'll get a more natural animal look So there's the iliac crest right there. Cyntha's asking where I purchased this lion cat sculpture. I don't really remember where it's from. If you look up like a lion or cat écorché, that's what they're called, you should be able to find it. There's like Jung's Anatomy, which is a different one. This one is by somebody, I think her name is Gabriella something. But I've had this for years, so I'm sorry that the name is actually kind of blanking on me. But yeah, if you look up, you know, lion anatomy sculpture, you'll find it. There's not that many of them out there, so you'll definitely find it. Trying to give it more of our animal anatomy from our creature design. We've got a very flat, made a very square head, so we're gonna try to make sure that we kind of square this head off. And in our drawing, I think our ears are a little more to the side, and they're pretty small. Because a lot of our creature is going to be the pangolin armor as well, so they're kind of more like that. From the front, this is looking kind of iffy, but that's okay. We just got to put all these spots, all this anatomy in the right spot, and we'll be okay. I haven't really worked much on the up a little bit. We'll start talking a little bit about anatomy as we get into this, but I think for now what I want to do is kind of block out. We're getting a pretty decent silhouette so far. And again, blocking out everything so it feels pretty good. I want to try to start blocking out... Sorry, I'm realizing I want to squash this a little bit more. Blocking out the face a bit more. And then we can kind of transfer... I don't know, for me, when it comes to starting to sculpt like anatomy or getting into a bunch of other stuff, I like to kind of finalize the feel of the face that we're going for, and then kind of go from there, and that can kind of send us on a style guide, I guess, essentially, for the rest of the sculpt. Gimme. And forms are really tricky on it. Like this part here in general is very tricky for most people. So we'll get into talking about that too. But to get a little bit more information here, I'm going to go ahead and split off the head so I can add some more resolution to this without having to add a bunch of resolution to our body. I'm gonna make this a little smaller. There we go. So again, I like to block it in almost like a skull at first, which is why I'll have reference of something like I have a saber-tooth skull that I have in my reference that I'll also be looking at. Another interesting thing to help maybe add some realism, or if you're having trouble with some proportions of animals, if you draw a line from the nose all the way back like this, you should be able to line up the eyeball to the ears. So if you go and look at like actual anatomy or animals, usually the ear to the eye to the nose lines up pretty well. So that's a good way to kind of just mark what you're doing and say, am I hitting something correctly? Sir Saito on YouTube says, I noticed that the ribcage in cats is proportionally larger to the pelvis compared to humans. Is that correct? It's a lot longer, and yeah, the pelvis in most animals is I don't know if I would say smaller, but proportionally to their ribs, yeah, it's definitely a little smaller. A lot of that has to do with the fact that, animals, especially quadrupeds, are designed to run forward. So you want to think of it as something that's more aerodynamic, basically, which is why they have a very long rib cage, but they have a very narrow. From the front, like a lion is super narrow. If I turn this sculpt, you'll see that it's a pretty narrow view and silhouette from the front. So yeah, the widest point of an animal is usually going to be the rib cage. On most animals, it'll usually be the rib cage. Whereas in people, for like male anatomy especially, it'll be more of like the torso or the shoulder blades. Our shoulders are going to be our widest point. And then in drawings for females, usually we'll make the hips the widest point in for females, but there's always exceptions to the rule. Always, always, always. But again, knowing the rules is what's important, because then you'll know how to break them correctly. If you don't know the rules at all, then there's no way for you to properly break them. I'm trying to make sure that I get that feeling of the skull in there first, before adding any anatomy or any other form of anatomy. You want to make sure that you can feel where that. And you can even, I don't usually go this far, but you can sculpt out the skull first, before adding anything, and then add stuff on top of it. But for the eyes, I really like to make sure that it feels like the eyes are facing forward, because a lot of people will make that mistake. They'll put the eyes on the side of the head, especially for something that's like a predator animal. That's a really common mistake that I see all the time. Stormcrow's asking if I'm planning on giving it pangolin-like claws, and the answer is yes. I'm going to do a merge of the two, so I'm going to try to make them feel long and pangolin-like, but also still kind of follow with the anatomy of a big cat. So yeah, this is where your competitor anatomy comes in handy, because you know how to kind of blend or create the two or merge the two together properly. For a long time, I probably won't put in an eye. I like to kind of just keep that. Again, it's the same thing that I did on all the other sculpts. You kind of just fake an eye in there and see how it feels. Because trying to get enough geometry to like create eyelids and do all this other stuff, you're just going to be fighting yourself a lot in the sculpting process. So I would say it's just easier to try to avoid that to begin with. I'm trying to zoom in on the little pangolin nose and see how I can kind of combine it with a lion's nose. So I'm going to try to. He's going to end up being so cute, actually, and not scary at all. But that's okay. We're going to label it the monster, and then everyone's going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to do some scary stuff, and then they're going to watch this and be like, oh, it's so cute. It's just a cute little pangolin animal. But yeah, just trying to block in and get all these shapes feeling right. The widest part of usually of a face on an animal is going to be the zygomatic arch here, which is a cheekbone. right? So wherever that cheekbone's going to lie, it's usually going to be the widest point on an animal's face. You know, and you can kind of see that here, where that is on their face. This one has a really big jaw muscles, which is accurate. But usually this ridge right here is going to be the widest part of your sculpt. Yeah, no, understanding your anatomy and like going to the zoo and studying as many different creatures as possible is always really important. I'm going to go ahead and insert some teeth as well. So I usually will just grab, whoops, don't do that. I accidentally had my gizmo on, so it'll switch your thing. But I can grab a cylinder and I can pull these out, and then I'll say split mass points. So now I have that. And then I'll just round them out. Now I can stretch it and turn them out and turn it down. Easy peasy. Gotta place that somewhere where I know the skull is and where that would technically sit, so I can kind of sculpt around that as well. Synth is saying Dracol Jr. He used a technique where he would sculpt out different head ideas on different layers and create a new layer to start combining layers. Oh, to make an... Yeah, I could understand how that would make sense. I've never tried that. I've always just kind of sculpted what I think looks or feels right. But I could see how that would definitely work. And that could be kind of like a fun study. Like if you keep the anatomy the same and you do, you know, as long as you have enough topology for it, you could basically do a sculpt of, you know, the forearm and front legs of a big cat, and then try to turn it in properly to, I don't know, like a horse anatomy, and then like blend shape between the two, and you know, you might be able to find like a really weird medium, happy medium, that you never thought of before. There's plenty of ways to kind of study that stuff. But that's a good comparative anatomy study for sure. I don't feel like his cheekbone is... I don't feel like he's looking as forward as he should be. That's a little better. I'm also going to give him a bigger bridged... And you can see that it's not a lot of topology, but I'm trying to get in as much as I can by using as little topology as possible. So the more you can focus on getting as much out of that topology as you can without up-resing, I think will just help in the long run, coming up with proper shapes and stuff. It allows you not to go too big too fast. Because if I like smooth all this out, you can see how quickly it all goes away. But it's important to kind of keep that stuff in mind. I think I want to give him like a bigger jaw here. You know, if you're starting to run into where you're like, okay, I really am running out of resolution, that's where you can go up to the next level and start adding some more resolution to your sculpt. So I have a pretty big brow on my reference. Like he's got like kind of like a plated head or something. So I can kind of start to flatten some of this out and maybe push out this form here. And you can use the, I like to use it, like you can use a pinch brush to kind of pinch that into a corner. Yeah. From afar, I think that's looking fine. The biggest thing too that we're gonna have to start doing to start having this feel like our creature that we're creating is putting in those pangolin little plates. I almost forgot the word. I'm struggling with words today, guys. It's Tuesday and I don't know. My brain's turned off. But yeah, obviously our creature, the big part of our creature silhouette is coming from that plating and that armor. So it's not really going to quite look like what our initial, concept is yet, because we're just trying to block out, and I'm just trying to get these shapes in, which we're still working on, right? Like this is a much bigger torso. We're going to start pushing more stylized as we get closer and closer to doing the body. So that's what I'm going to try to work on now, is getting these cool shapes in here. So yeah, you can see how, and like the arms are a little shorter and thicker and things like that. So we're going to start kind of like trying to push it into this realm. And it's hard because it's one of those things where like if you don't push it enough, it's going to look like weird anatomy. But if you push it too hard, then it might end up looking really strange. So we're gonna start working on that section. And maybe I can lengthen his body out even more. And I'm trying to, this silhouette, we're going to try to see how much of this we can. And again, a lot of this is going to be dictated once we put plates on it. But we're going to try to get as close as we can to the feeling of our animal without doing that yet. Synth is asking how we're going to place the plates. We can do it by hand. I think for a block out, we could probably do it by hand because there's actually not that many and we could repeat it. But I think maybe later on we could use something like nano mesh. I think for me, I'd rather just kind of place them by hand really quickly because there's actually not that many on the body. And then the thing about nano mesh that you have to think about is it requires like good topology, an accurate topology, which just takes more time. It'll be a good way to do it once we have the topology, but to block out something, to get the feeling of something, I'll probably just place them by hand really quickly. All right, so let's get into some more anatomy here. I think that's too high. That's all right. So we're gonna sculpt. So what I like to do to start sculpting in some anatomy is I'll just carve really intensely to start figuring out where all these apexes and where all these lines are. So I'll start with, maybe the scapula. This right here is a hard bone because this is actually the tip of the humerus. It's right here. This is the humerus that goes, basically it goes down like this into the arm, inside the arm. And then this is the olecranon, which is the elbow. So most animals have actually fairly small humeruses in comparison, to their forearms. And so you can exaggerate that. I think once I like to draw out this stuff because looking at it, I'm like, oh, I think the humerus is actually a little too short. So I can bring this up and say, oh, the scapula, do I want the scapula to reach this high or should the vertebrae make that silhouette? And I'm like, I think the vertebrae should make that silhouette. So I'll actually also shorten where his scapula actually is. And then I can turn this into his spine. being aware and cautious of, anatomy and proportions is really important in this scenario. I'm gonna pull this out. I also like keeping this stuff separate because it allows for me to create really good overlap here. Because there's a lot of overlap that goes on, where the rib cage meets. Most big cats don't have, or not most big cats, and a lot of, I was gonna say most animals actually don't have clavicles like we do. So the anatomy will run straight into the arms, and then basically there's this little point on the chest, and I can always turn my page to see the front, but there's basically kind of like an X here. So the anatomy will run down just like a sternocleidomastoid muscle, and it'll meet right here at like a tiny little where the rib cage, or like where the sternum is, and then it'll kind of splay out. And this right here is actually the pecs. So these right here are the pectoralis muscles, which you can see are much smaller on animals than they are on humans. And then the rib cage goes back, and the sternum is right there. And then the ribs go up like that. So if you actually put, if you were to splay his arms out like open wide, you can see that's kind of comparative to how our muscle structure is. So, whoops, build up. So same thing here. This is the scapula muscle right here. So this is the scapula. This is the bone, and then there's two muscles on either side of that. I'll flip back to my other anatomy. So there's two muscles on either side that come down like that. And that's the teres minor and major. So that's the same as our scapula back here. It's just more to their side because it holds almost like a girdle that holds their ribs up in place. And that goes down. It's all the same insertion points. It's just the shapes are different. And then on top of that too, there's going to be your little deltoid muscles here. So the deltoid is actually pretty small as well. And it's always, the deltoid gets heavily overlapped by the big neck muscles that come and attach across and down into the forearm here. And then this big part, this is the most important part, is there's this triangle shape here that goes down, and then there's this big triangle shape here, and these are the triceps of an animal. So the triceps in animals are usually really big. They're usually this nice, big, huge shape. If we look at our anatomy reference, that's this right here. Or if we look right here, see there's the scapula, it's humerus, and then this big muscle right there will be your trap muscles or your tricep muscles. So yeah, right there. I think I can go to the side view. So you can kind of see it. You can see the 1, 2, and 3. So that's your tricep there, and there's the scapula. There's the big neck muscle that comes down, and then these are all your little forearm muscles, and this is the elbow. So this is actually their wrist, and all the anatomy follows as such. So make sure that that's a nice big tricep muscle, lots of volume that gets attached to the elbow. And then the brachioradialis muscle, which is our muscle here that makes, really nice forearms. They also have that too. And that starts in between the tricep and where these neck muscles come down, and then the bicep. The bicep in animals is also fairly small in comparison. So you're going to get a muscle that overlaps like that. And just especially in big cats, it's the same thing as us. They need to be able to pronate and supinate, which is turning your hand or rotating your hand. They don't have as much mobility as we do, but they still need to be able to reach out and grab. Unlike a horse, where the radius and ulna are actually merged and fused. They still have a radius and an ulna, it's just fused so it can't pronate and supinate. But a big cat's can. So this big muscle goes up around and attaches to here on the inside, just like on ours. And So that way when they pull, when that muscle gets pulled, it'll actually turn their hand or turn their paw. So this shape is usually exaggerated a lot. If I, again, bring up Joe Whitlatch's drawings, usually this shape right here that she creates in a lot of her anatomy drawings right here, that's that muscle that she's exaggerating right here, that overlaps. You can see that it slightly overlaps into the inside of the, there it is again right there. That's that brachialis muscle basically, that helps them turn their paws. So that's where you're going to get a lot of really nice dynamic shapes, is having this bulge out and then have it really turn in and have it really rotate. You can see how dynamic you can get your forearm if you really push those shapes. There's the pec muscles. Kind of dive this in a bit more to really get that overlap, and then the other muscles come out from behind there. Again, I like to really push all this stuff first, and then we can dial back anything that's too extreme. But I like to make sure that it's all there first before deciding to push it back. And get that wrist going. And this is where we could, I could grab these actually, and duplicate it. We'll see how long these actually stay, but it's good to block this stuff in. Rotate that in. And I think I gave it also a little dew claw as well, which is on the inside here. Oh, don't merge. Here we go. Trying to figure out the rotating the shape properly. So a dew claw helps when they like attack and they can kind of latch onto a prey. Even your dog, if you have a dog or a cat, you'll see the dew claw and it helps them latch and grab onto stuff. It's usually on the inside. But we can make ours, we can exaggerate it and make it a little bigger. And now I can use the move topological to kind of move these around. So unlike a cat, these will not be, retractable. Cats have retractable claws. Dogs do not. Synthesis saying he's never tried to skin weight a lion or cat before. It'd be interesting to see what kind of poses and range they can have for motion testing. Yeah, I mean, they're super, super flexible. Dogs and cats. I mean, cats are obviously the obvious one that's more flexible, but I mean, my dogs are super flexible. They like turn or, sleep upside down, do all sorts of crazy things. So yeah, I wish I had as flexible as a spine as a dog or a cat, for sure. And posing this guy is going to be a lot of fun, and that's something that we can play with as well. I'm just trying to block in where the pads go. If you really look at animal anatomy, finger or their paws are really strange because, again, they kind of sit up. I don't know how to explain this. Basically, there's a bone here, and then a bone that goes across here, and then the other bone right there, and then they kind of like plant out. So they're very much on their toes, and then what they actually stand on is like the paw pad, and then this gets all padded out. So the bone is actually up here. So when you really break down these shapes, they have some really interesting shapes for paws. We can make sure that we can try to... I'm not going to sit here and block this out entirely, but just trying to get these shapes right first. So yeah, there's going to be like a hard knuckle basically up here, and then the bone also bends here, and that's where you get these really intense little tendons. It's hard to tell in something that's so fluffy, you know. When we look at big cats and stuff, it's a little hard to tell, which is why usually in stylized stuff they'll just be like these big poofy paws, but in reality they're kind of doing like that number, if you guys are looking at me and not the screen, which is really interesting. And eventually we can maybe split these out so that way we can sculpt these more individually. But yeah, that's going to get more of an accurate paw shape. And then the paw is actually going to... paw pad will sit there. This will get carved in. Feet are pretty scary, like when you actually look at how they actually work and function. They look really weird. So getting those shapes in there is important. And for big cats, it's weird. There's the bone to make it retractable. Instead of it coming out like this, they actually come out from the side. So if you... and you can look this up. There's actually an extra little bone that... and this doesn't show it, unfortunately, because it's stylized, but the bone actually sits on the inside of the other bones, so they're not... so they actually kind of tuck into each other, which is really wild. And you can look up anatomy pictures of that. It's super, super interesting. But it'll totally make you rethink the way you sculpt dew claws and claws for big cats. This is a little different because we're doing giant like pangolin mole claws, you know, so we can kind of take liberty with that. But the idea is that the claws hang out here, right on the top, and then the paw pads. So when he's walking, the claws shouldn't be touching the ground, but the paw pad should be touching the ground, right? Because if you had to walk right on your fingertips, you probably wouldn't like that either. So again, taking all that stuff into consideration. Cool. So we've got our scapula, our triceps here, brachioradialis muscle. Those are the most important ones. The elbow, and then where all these nice forearm tendon muscles and stuff go. The most important too is going to be that tricep and this muscle that crosses over, and then the inner muscles. You don't need to know every single name of all these. It's just really more about knowing the proper shapes. Now if we get into the ribs, we're going to have right here is going to be the lats, or the latissimus dorsi, right? And that's going to go all the way up and attach into here, which will eventually also attach into what is the obliques. So the obliques also attach and come up here onto the spine. So in Christine Blaine, I think is her name, or Blair. I always forget her last name. Her animal anatomy is top notch. But if you look up her drawings, she really exaggerates this oblique muscle and squares off these hips. So she gets like really cool, very dynamic feeling and gestural stuff with her anatomy. And it's super pushed and it's wonderful. So she's definitely one to look up too. So we've got the ribs here. And there's a bunch of, basically there's a bunch of little muscles that go hanging down like this, that kind of keep everything nice and tight on the inside. But on the outside, it's a lot of other muscles that go the opposite direction. And then there'll be like a lot of fat here as well. But right here, there'll be the ribs. And then on top of that, there's going to be some, just like us, there'll also be some serratus muscles right here as well, which we don't have to completely exaggerate, but you'll see muscles like this that basically are going in the opposite, and then there'll be ones going this way, which are basically going into the ribs like that. So again, if you exaggerate this a lot, you're going to have a very shredded looking animal. But again, I like to put it all in there and then dial it back later. And then same thing, we have our trap muscles, right, go from our neck, and then we have big traps on the top. But for animals, it starts in the same place, so it still starts at the base of the skull, but it goes out and it'll attach and have that same triangular shape, but then it will go back like that and attach. So you still get the diamond shape, right? It's just in a very different structure than, or proportion, in comparison to human anatomy. And then you can kind of smooth it out. So you'll get a nice overlap here with the lats, and then you'll get a nice overlap of the trap muscle there going into the scapula. And it's one of those things that you just can't be afraid to carve out all this stuff like really intensely first, and then again bring it all back later. Because right now this might look really scary, right? Like there's a lot of insertion points and muscles that are going on. But the moment I take the clay and I smooth this out, the moment I take the clay buildup though and kind of start overlaying what would be like skin on top of it, it goes away pretty quickly. But the idea is that it's supposed to kind of hint at it being there, right? But we can kind of start to smooth that stuff out, and you'll see that it goes away really fast. Which is why I like to carve in and then kind of fill with the clay buildup back out again. I think I want to make his neck thicker, which means I'll make his head a little bigger and maybe come out down a little bit more, a little bigger. Like that. You can see we're starting to get there with our shapes. And then if we can start blending this stuff together, start blending that. The iliac crest is right here, right? Which is the hips. So making that really accentuated and exaggerated is always a really nice touch to animal anatomy. And then there's going to be the back of the pelvis bone here. And now there's a couple muscles of the back legs that are really important. So one is going to be this gluteus medius muscle, which goes from the iliac crest. It attaches to the top of the crest and it comes across like this. So it makes this real nice, big, beefy, like triangle shape up at the top, and goes, backwards. It goes this direction. And then that gets inserted with this long muscle here, right? You get this really nice insertion point basically across here. And then the quads sit right here in the front. And then you get this. This is medius and like gluteus maximus muscle, right? That all overlap. And then you get all this kind of stuff going into there and attaching to basically the shin, right? Which is the tibia and fibula. So you can really exaggerate and accentuate these muscles overlapping. and you'll get a much more dynamic looking back leg. I feel like a lot of people don't study enough of what's actually happening underneath the surface. If you're looking at the deep muscles, it's really important to look at that stuff. You can see it. Whoops. Anatomy. So you can see that here. There's the crest. There's going to be that medius muscle. There's the quad, and then all this stuff goes there. You can kind of see it there. So these aren't the deep muscles. So these are the muscles that go on top of the muscles that I'm talking about. But there's a really big muscle right back there that gives the pelvis that kind of volume. And you can see a lot of people there's the obliques and there's that medius muscle. And you'll see it a lot there and there. So it's a muscle that gets exaggerated a lot. And you can see there's a lot of cool stuff. So there's the quad there's the iliac crest, and then the deep muscle is going to be the medius, and then there's going to be a little muscle which is the not serratus, it starts with an S, sartorius. I could look it up right now if I can make sure that sartorius. Look at that, books are handy. Which is the same muscle that starts from the outside of our hip and goes inward. So again, the anatomy is all the same, it's just as to where it goes. Magic Meg is asking, did I study animal anatomy formally or just on a project by project basis? Big fan of yours, and I'm grateful that we get to watch your work. Thanks for your knowledge. Thank you, Magic Megs. I did not study animal anatomy at any sort of professional level or college level. This is just me reading these books, doing anatomical breakdowns, and going to the zoo a lot and studying a lot. So all this is self-taught knowledge from sculpting and basically drawing animals all the time. So all my anatomy knowledge, and Gnomon has animal anatomy classes and things like that too, which is obviously super helpful. They have anatomy drawing and all that good jazz. But a lot of the stuff that I know about dinosaurs or anatomical stuff was self-taught even before that. So I've been drawing these things and sculpting these things for a while now. Synth was mentioning watching something like Nat Geo Wild is super handy. You can throw on Nat Geo Wild or like The Planet or something that's on Netflix or whatever it may be. I think what's it called? I think it's called The Hunt on Amazon's really good. They have a lot of really cool footage, but throw that on and do some gesture drawing from it. Don't pause it and like pretend like you're there watching the animals in motion. Is super, super important to understanding how all this stuff functions. The same thing, we have, our hamstrings. Hamstrings are in the back here. And then the calf goes in between the two. So you're going to have a line right here. Oops, sorry, back face masking is not helping me right now. So you'll have a split. So one will go on the outside like that. And then one will go on the inside. And then the calf muscle goes right up in between. And then you have the calf muscle that does this. Now, an interesting thing, and you can go touch your dog's leg and be like, "What? This is crazy!" But this is actually super cool. It's one of my favorite parts about animal anatomy. This is basically like the Achilles tendon that we have. We have this too, but it's far more prevalent. I'm sure if you see animals, you see this weird shape in the back here. It's kind of like this shape. It looks like that, right? So what that is it's actually an empty place. So in the front, there's the bone, right? That goes and attaches to here. And then this is, again, the ankle. So this is the ankle bone here. And then there's the calf muscle. And then this is the calf tendon that goes down and attaches to this ankle bone. But this in-between part doesn't have anything. So it's actually just skin that's kind of stretching in between the tendon and the bone. So when you go look at if I zoom in here, so this shape right here that's super prominent, this happens because there's nothing between the bone and then the Achilles tendon that attaches to the olecranon of the ankle, which is pretty cool. When I found that out, I was like, what? There's like, that's why it's there? You can see here, this is a really good example of it, is there's the bone and there's the tendon, and then basically there's like a gap. So it's pretty interesting finding out that one of the most key, I guess, shapes when you're identifying like the back of a leg of an animal is actually because there's nothing there. So negative space is just as important as, you know, everything else that goes around it, which I found super, super interesting. So there you go. If you didn't know that, now you do. But it helps me understand, you know, understanding that is what will help you understand that this is a separate bone here than the bone in the back, right? Which is your tarsals, and then your metatarsals, right? Which are your feet bones, little foot bones. Damn bones, damn bones, damn foot bones, damn bones, damn bones. But yeah, that stuff, again, you don't have to be like me where I'm like naming anatomy muscles. As long as you understand the shapes that are going on, that is the most important. It's not, you don't have to play the memory game. I'm just super passionate about animals in general, so it's just something that I liked to do. I loved learning and understanding the science behind, you know, all this anatomy, and learning the names. But, you know, the names help, you know, if you're looking at animal anatomy or human anatomy, being able to go latissimus dorsi, being like, where's that? I know what that is, and where it relates to on tigers and horses and humans is always really, really helpful. Since says he remembers when he pulls a hamstring, so he always remembers having that muscle. Yeah, if you pull a muscle, you'll realize where that muscle lives really quickly. I get that same feeling when, I don't know if you ever like hurt one of your fingers and you're like, my pinky's not that important. Like, it's fine. But then you hurt it and you don't realize how often you really use your pinky to do everything. And becomes super obnoxious to do anything. So, yeah. This, by the way, all inserts into the great trochanter, which is right in there, which is, again, the big bony part of the femur, which we also have, which in most, in humans, it'll be the widest part of your legs is the great trochanter, which is just the bony part of the top of your femur. And those big bony protuberances, if I'm not mistaken, are called olecranons, which is a super cool word. I remember this being called olecranon, which is the elbow bony part, but I think it also stands for anything that's like a bony protuberance. But there's also other words for different types of bony protuberances. So don't quote me on that one. I'm not anatomy professional. I just study it for drawing's sake. So, you know, my knowledge isn't always going to be perfect, but. This is always kind of a weird one, so I'm going to push this out a bit more. I think I could probably just grab this one. So I'm going to try to get, there's a nice like string, kind of like skin overlap that happens there that I want to sculpt out. It's a nice little stretchy bit. So I can kind of, I like sculpting it because it's got tons of depth. To what's behind the leg and what's in front of the leg. So if you're good about sculpting it, you'll get a lot of depth in your sculpt here. Yeah, and see, that's the kind of stuff we want, like a lot of cool inserts and depth and stuff when we're, you know, modeling this stuff out. And the more you'll smooth out, you can see that it looked really intense at first, but it all slowly starts to kind of fade into the background. It kind of starts to blend together and feel, you know, more organic. which is kind of what we want. If anything feels too smooth, I like to just, you know, kind of go in there and reiterate the insertion points. You know, I know that the tricep folds up into there, right? So if I really carve into there and get that feeling like an overlap, then when I blend it back into it, it'll feel really good. Same thing with this here. You know, the armpit, making sure that the armpit's nice and deep is always really, really helpful. Add depth to your model. And I like to exaggerate again that humerus bone that's standing out right there. And then again, getting that overlap right in there, super important too. Because then this shape here of these muscles all kind of converging into there and getting this feeling like it's overlapping this and this coming and overlapping that is all really, really important to giving the proper forms to feel like they're really sitting in there. So it's 5:30. I could sculpt on this anatomy all day, but one thing I do want to do is get those. Yeah, that's starting to look there, and you can see that the silhouette stays simple. If you see anything that's kind of too bony, I'll usually go over like this over the silhouette and kind of smooth that stuff out. So, for example, there's a lot of kind of boniness or lumpiness that's happening along the bottom of this, so I'll just go over with the clay buildup and kind of build it up really nicely and very carefully, just so that we can get a nicer silhouette. And same thing with starting to merge some of these pieces together. Remember, these are all still separate pieces, and I'll keep them separate because it'll be way easier to pose later. And one thing that I will do later is I can mask stuff like this, and I can say, you know, the neck, I don't need it to be there, so I can push that in. You know, and that'll help with my insertion points and stuff. Same thing with, you know, this shape up here. This probably doesn't need to be all the way up there. I could cut that off later and kind of adjust that stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and start putting in I'll start putting in some plates. I'm going to push those back too, and we'll put some claws in there. I didn't really get a lot of time yet to sculpt the back paws, but they're the same as the front. There's not usually a dew claw, but maybe for the sake of our creature, we could put like a cool little, you know, little claw back there. Maybe it helps him dig while he's running or something. So yeah, so there we go. So now we got a little cat blocked out. So I'm gonna go ahead and insert a, does it really matter, a cube? Because I'll always insert a cube and then change it later anyway. So we could probably do I just do a cube. Then we can rotate it 45. And thin this out. And looking at pangolins, if I make something that looks kind of like that. This isn't going to be the final geometry or anything, so I'm not too worried about it. I'm just trying to get something that feels about like the right shape. And then we can play with it later. And I'll keep it really low res. Because again, this isn't going to be the final one. So yeah, it's not super important yet. I just want enough to get some curvature going. That's all. Cool. So now I can, now you want to think about how you're going to draw this out. The moment you draw it out like this is going to turn the other way. So I can flip this 180 and this will draw, because I want this to be the tip of it. So I'll say create insert mesh and say new. Cool. So now we have that. And then for now, I'll keep it in symmetry. Later, maybe we can adjust how offset the stuff is. But now I can draw that out. And I'll say mass points. So now I have that. And then what we can do is we can start, I'm going to start blocking in the bigger ones first. And then we can start playing with stuff later. So it seems like a pain to pose these all by hand, but I do actually think you'd be surprised how quickly it could go. Especially if you do something like this where you can just bring this down to the pivot point and I can move this, rotate it. If you're just really smart about your camera angle, stuff is actually pretty easy. And if it's really low res too, it'll be easier. And one of the things that we remember is that the pangolins scales don't, you know, they're not, I guess, what would you call that? They don't bounce back and forth, right? They go kind of in a line all the way back. So they kind of do this number. So we can kind of follow that same thing. And then the overlap happens kind of like that in there. And again, I like keeping it really low because then I can, it's just way easier to adjust later for now. I can move that down and I can just kind of segment that, make it a little bigger. You can see how quickly we can get something going. I think that's the idea. You just remind yourself, blocking, you know? What does blocking really mean? Get all the shapes in there first before you start making any other choices, you know? Trying to look at my reference to see what I had. Because I like the shapes around the face that I had for the initial drawing, so I want to make sure that I'm kind of following that. And I should get pretty big. I can always bend these down later. Ooh, I actually didn't. I modeled that kind of poorly, didn't I? I didn't even give it a midline. Oh well, that's okay. I can just divide it and give it a midline.
But see, I can do something like that, right, where I have this in place, and then I can select this and select, whoops, select this dude. I can mask it, and then I can repeat that a bunch of times. But in reality, later we'll probably end up using nanomesh, you know, but for now to get some shapes in there. And I'll make my move topological brush really big. I can start kind of moving this stuff and creating some more overlap. Right, something like that. So it's good to just kind of get a feel for how this stuff is going to lay out before, you know, going crazy with stuff. And then this also, you know, hand placing this stuff really quickly will give you an idea of how you should build out your nanomesh, right? Because your nanomesh is going to be based on the topology you create. So I can have a better plan moving ahead of, you know, where I want these plates to go and how I want it to look. If I do this step first. So you know, for example, I want this to feel maybe like it rotates out more, right? Pull that in and rotate this out more. And I'm not worried about topology because there barely is any, right? So again, it's kind of the nice part about working really low with stuff first. Just trying to get this feeling. Later with nanomesh, we could even technically, I mean, I'm not going to say it kind of animate it, right? Because you can rotate it on a certain axis, so we could see how it feels like when he flattens, and then maybe when he, you know, is threatening, he like puffs it up and puffs it out, right? So we could even see what that would look like later with nanomesh when we get into that. So that's something that I kind of look forward to. Anything that makes the creature feel like it's going to come to life is super motivating for me. Just filling in some gaps now. Again, trying to figure out how is this going to overlap into you know, the anatomy for the arms, and that's where pangolins to me are crazy. How the plating goes all the way down in the front is pretty bananas. How they have such good mobility and yet have all this like crazy plating. It's super impressive. You can see it's really easy just to go boop, 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 boop. You're just really careful about how you're placing it. You know, based on your camera, you can get stuff looking good pretty quickly, or at least feeling like they're in the right position. And then I can just change the size of these to squash them to get our kind of shape breakup, right? Because we kind of want to go from like big to small. Which, you know, speaking of, maybe want this side, kind of try to figure out where the biggest blade's going to be. And I think, you know, wherever that silhouette is going to be the most prominent when he's threatening, you know, and he's puffing them up. So I think this area right here is going to have some pretty big plates, I would think. Just before the mobility comes into play where his scapula is. So all along his neck, that we have kind of blocked out, I think that's where most of this is going to sit. Oh, grabbing the right one without a midline can be kind of annoying. Oops. Okay. Now looking at it too, you know, if we look at the silhouette of it so far, I'm looking at it and going, oh, I think this could be even bigger. You know, like I think his shoulders and his anatomy here could puff up even more to get the feeling that we want. Especially because you don't want this gap, you know, you don't want that silhouette. You actually kind of want something that's can take the anatomy now and push this out even more. And I kind of want a more powerful back. I want this line to be usually a good rule of thumb too is not to have anything that concaves. Making something concave will make it feel kind of weak structurally. So, and muscles are all about big volumes, right? So there's really no muscle that's going to create negative shapes as well. So keeping that in mind is also going to help you make sure that, you know, all your shapes here are really strong. We can push these all out. We'll also probably at the base they'll get kind of thicker, so we can kind of thicken up the base of these a little bit, so that way there's just no cracks in between. And we'll get there with that stuff. So that also helps me realize like what shape I need. Is if you do a block out like this really quickly, you can go, oh, okay, I need to make sure that the base of this has a much thicker base than I started with. So when I model the final, I have an understanding of, you know, what shape do I need. I also think most of these I've kind of lengthened. So I'm like, oh, okay, it needs to be, you know, probably needs it to be a little longer. Like the base plate needs to be longer because it needs to overlap really heavily with the stuff that's in front of it. So doing something like this, again, just gives me a lot of, basically gives me like a roadmap of what's working and what isn't with this initial shape that took me no time to make, but I'm learning a lot by just hand placing this stuff and going, oh, okay, you know, this, and this need to change. And sometimes this type of stuff can be kind of relaxing, you know. Now look at my drawing again. I think I could space maybe these out a little more, but I'm gonna go ahead and auto group it. So I can take, oops. I'm gonna take all of this. I'm gonna take this whole section. Whoops. And duplicate that out. And I'll use the move tool with symmetry on. That's kind of what I drew in my final drawing, was like this kind of overlapping 3 that goes all the way down. I'm going to make sure I kind of put that in place. I'm just using the move tool to kind of squish it and find the spot for it. As a placeholder, like, that's not half bad, right? We're getting pretty far very quickly, and that's the goal. Cool. And now we have, I also want to block in his big giant tail because that's a really big integral part of his silhouette. So just going to draw these out as well. Got to be careful about symmetry, stretching your geometry. You look at our creature come to life there. The moment you put plates on it, you're like, whoa, it's a thing now. All fun. I'm just gonna put one more here. I think the progress is pretty good. I'm going to see if I can do it. I'm going to try to snap this home. So I'm gonna split. I am gonna split this off. So split mass points. I'm gonna turn it and rotate it, and I'm gonna try to do a mirror and weld on it. Other way. That sort of worked. That's close enough. I just wanted something that had more volume on either side so I could stick it into the middle. Why can I not move that? There we go. And this is something too that I'm noticing is as I put these plates, I'm like, oh, I think the tail needs to be a little longer. So, you know, as you put this stuff out there, you're like, oh, what is it that I liked about my drawing that I'm trying to, you know, retain? I'm like, oh, I need to make the tail longer. I can just take this whole thing and duplicate it again. I'll just make it smaller. For silhouette's sake, I think it'd be nice to angle these down because you can then see the silhouette actually gets more broken up that way. Add one more. Getting pretty close to what we have for our drawing. You know, and I think as we go along, we'll definitely have to add some, you know, smaller scales. I think the front of this, he's gonna have like what the pangolin has, which is he kind of has like front face plates, you know, which we'll either sculpt or we can, you know, leave with the big face plates itself. We'll see what we kind of come up with there. But yeah, my biggest thing is just trying to make sure that this silhouette feels good. Yeah, I think that's coming along. But I think now looking at this and looking at my drawing, I think his forearm is not thick enough. So I think I wanna bring this out and thicken this stuff up. Give him a nice beefy forearm. And this is where you can start getting into more of the realm of like stylization, right? I think I want to do the same. I kind of want to pull up, because now that we have the silhouette that's feeling a bit more, bring this stuff forward too. I'm really just trying to hit that again. I want to hit that silhouette, because I really like the big shapes going on in my drawing. So I'm really trying to make sure that that's getting through into the initial sculpt. I started getting pretty big plates very early on in my drawings, so I just want to make sure that I'm kind of replicating that. Because that silhouette's feeling a little better, and then I can also kind of, maybe I can make this feel a little blockier. Right, so a lot of these changes that I'm making now have to do with bulking out. This could get a little thicker. Blocking out what I see in my drawing, and trying to get that feeling to translate. This is where, I lost my ears, right? So I'm like, oh, where can my ears go that makes sense? So I think maybe I can bring them forward, kind of like a lion's mane. They'll sit back a bit, so they'll kind of blend in almost with the like the pangolin scales. Might be able to do something clever where if I do group by normals and I crease this, there we go. I can kind of keep the hardness that I want. Let's see what it looks like when it's a little smoother. I think I'll have to kind of repeat these a little bit down the line, or this is going to be the same as like when you sculpt fur, is figuring out what you're going to sculpt and what you're going to put in as like a separate object, in order to get this to blend a lot nicer and stuff too, right? Like he's not just going to have scales. I mean, the pangolin kind of does. He does have just kind of scales and then skin, but we're gonna do something where it's a bit more of a blend between the top of him and kind of like the sense of underbelly that he'll have. So yeah. I think I want to maybe pull this paw pad up a little bit. So yeah, I think the beefy forearm is helping more. Could even beef this out a little bit. But again, keeping all those silhouette shapes there. For example, I want this to be a smoother transition. Do something like that.
Okay, I thought that blended so nicely together that I was like, oh, did I accidentally merge all my parts? But I didn't. It just blended really nicely. Yeah, still a lot more work, obviously, to do. But I think we got to a pretty decent, block out so far. I think we're just gonna keep on. The fun part about creature work is these next few weeks are just gonna be refining, what's kind of already here and getting more diving deeper into the anatomy, and looking at each section. One piece at a time, and then starting to slowly flesh out everything. But we are coming up on time here, so I'm going to have to call it a night here. But I think we made some good progress, and I hope you guys enjoyed this stream of our monster creature again. So yeah, so there we go. So that's our block in, and again, looking at our initial drawing. I think there's still a lot to do to kind of capture this, but we're getting there with these shapes and stuff. I think the head needs a bit more work. I think this feels just too much like a lion right now, so we can play with how that's going to feel, and what it is that I like about this that we can kind of capture back into 3D. So yeah, I think so far we're making pretty good progress. But there you have it. So again, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. Always a pleasure hanging out with you guys, and hope you guys enjoy watching the sculpt. Tune in next week on Tuesday, same time, same host at yours truly. And yeah, so this is Archetype, sponsored again by Lenovo and AMD. Hope you guys are enjoying it, and I will catch you next time. Bye.